Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club. In today's episode, I'm going to do something very different than what I have done in previous episodes. What am I going to do? Well, we are going to explore a new programming environment. We typically, on this channel, use RStudio. RStudio is an example of an IDE, an integrated development environment. I think I've heard some people call it. Well, RStudio used to be made by a company called RStudio, but they changed their name to something called Posit a few years ago. And in the last year or so, Posit has announced that they are developing a new IDE called Positron. Their goal for Positron is to be an IDE that anybody can use to program in any coding language. So this could be R, of course, as well as Python, Rust, Julia, Ruby, I think. Right? And so the idea is to have an integrated, truly integrated development environment across all programming languages. This tool, Positron, is still in what they call beta, so it's still being developed and still being tested in a very aggressive way, whereas something like RStudio, I think, is a bit more mature. It doesn't really change a whole lot from release to release. Positron, on the other hand, because it's in beta, is more frequently changing. I have never used Positron, okay? I haven't downloaded it. Obviously, I haven't installed it, so I haven't used it. I don't know that I've actually seen anybody use it. So what I want to do in today's episode is download it, install it, and then because I don't want to just simply do an exploration of all the menus and all the different bells and whistles, what I want to do is I want to build a figure with you. And so we're going to build this figure that takes data from the Gapminder package. Gapminder is a very popular data set that is frequently used when teaching R. I don't happen to use it because it's a bit cliche, but I'm going to use it here to build this figure. And I hope that by building this figure with you, we'll get to see kind of the nooks and crannies of Positron and how the experience of building a figure in Positron compares to doing the same type of thing in RStudio. So we'll start by going into our browser to positron.posit.co. At the top here, they have a banner warning you that this may or may not be a good fit for you. I'm going to throw a caution to the wind, and as I've said, we're going to try it. This is what Positron looks like. Here they are using Python code to kind of do an example of things, right? And so this 4-panel window looks a lot like RStudio. The other thing it looks a lot like is Visual Studio Code or VS Code. To be totally honest with you, I use VS Code a lot. I don't use RStudio so much. I use RStudio a lot when I teach. I do a lot of RStudio when I'm using my local laptop computer, but I do a lot of work for my research up on a high-performance computer cluster. And I find that RStudio is pretty kludgy in kind of doing work with that remote interface. But Visual Studio Code, on the other hand, I just really like using for programming and interfacing with that high-performance computer environment. And so I'm pretty optimistic that Positron might have a lot of those R features that I need or love or want already baked into Positron. And so it might be actually a good replacement for Visual Studio Code. Sometimes I call it Virtual Studio Code, but it's Visual Studio Code. Or sometimes I might just say VS Code when I can't remember what it's supposed to be. All right. And so again, this is what we're going for. And we'll go ahead and start by, let's go to the get started. And again, the question, is it for me? I'm going to assume it's good for us. If we look at the machine prerequisites, it will run on Windows, Linux, as well as Mac. And if you're a Windows user, I think you need to have C++ available. This might be part of the reason why it's still in beta, but encourage you, if you're a Windows user, to kind of go through some of this and note that there's a few extra prerequisites you're going to have to do if you're doing this in Windows. And so I'm a R user, of course. I'm not a Python user, so let's look at the R prerequisites. This will require R 4.2 or higher. Coming here into my terminal, if I type R, I can load R from the terminal. I see I'm in 4.4.2, so clearly I have a new enough version. This does raise the important point that I find people often forget, is that RStudio is not R. RStudio and Positron and VS Code are ways to run R, right? When we say it's an integrated development environment, the tool, the console like this that we see here in my command prompt, that is one part that's being integrated with the other parts. The other parts that get integrated would be things like a text editor for writing the code we then run in a console like this, right? I can certainly do like 1 + 1 and get 2 here, but doing much more sophisticated things like building a 30-line ggplot command, I don't want to do that at the prompt. I want to do that in code. And so having an IDE makes it really easy then to transfer that code into the console. Other things like having documentation available, windows for plots, making it easy to install things, looking at what variables I have active in my environment, right? Those are all the types of things that an IDE will keep track of for you so that you don't have to do it on your own. If you're doing everything through the console like this, then that hurts. It's painful. So again, my point is that those IDEs require R. They're not R itself. Again, it requires 4.2 or higher. We're at 4.4. We're good. We don't have to install that. And I think this is all good too. If you're an R package developer, you also want to make sure that you have the current version of certain R packages, all of which had recent updates to them to make them run smoothly in Positron. And so we can run this in R to get it to run. Maybe I'll go ahead and do that with install packages using base R. And I'll go ahead and run that here in my R console and get these installed. So that took a few seconds to download and install, and now we have all of the prerequisites for R. So great. So we'll go ahead and to the left of Get Started, there is a menu to download Positron. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And here now we see all of the different versions that are available. Again, Windows, a couple of different flavors of Linux, as well as Mac. So I'll go ahead and click on this. This is going to take a few minutes to download. I'll be right back once things are finished downloading. So that downloaded, I'm going to go ahead and double click on my Positron DMG, and I will go ahead and slide the Positron app into my applications directory. And this is going to take a few seconds to transfer. Very good. Coming over to my applications, I'll double click on Positron to launch Positron. So Mac OS X has additional security on things, and so they want to point out to me that positron.app is an app. Yes, I know, you download it from the internet. Of course, where else would I get it from these days? Are you sure you want to open it? Yes, I will go ahead and click open. So now we have Positron opened. I'm going to go ahead and make the window bigger, the same size as my whole screen. And I really like the look of this already. It's really light, right? It's if you know me and kind of how I like to build figures, I'm not really into a lot of like boldness or a lot of extraneous things. I think about color, and that if something's blue, then I want it to be colored and to stick out at me. Whereas if something's not so important, then I want it to kind of fade into the background, right? I want it to be simple. And that's what I'm getting here, right? In contrast with like RStudio, there's a lot of thick lines here, right? And I zoom in a lot so I can kind of see what's going on. But even if I zoom out to kind of what I might normally work on, that kind of level of resolution, that level of magnification, there's still a lot of color and thick lines and things like that here in RStudio. The files finder is buried down here in the lower right as part of the set of tabs. Whereas again, what I notice from I want to say VS Code, because this looks a lot like VS Code, from Positron, is that the finder is over here on the left side, right? And so if I did like open folder, and I could open whatever folder I want, right? Whereas this kind of gets tied into the working directory when doing things in that lower right corner with RStudio. So if I were to say like desktop and then open, I now have my whole desktop on the left side here, really easy for me to look at. And of course, Apple then pops up some things. Do you trust the author of the files in this folder? Yes, I trust them. It's me, right? But again, we have this welcome tab that's really nice and easy to work with. I can do Command plus, I think, to kind of zoom in and make the size of things bigger, right? I think if things are like VS Studio, if I click on the Explorer here, I can minimize that off to the side and I can bring it back to get me more real estate. And again, this looks a lot like what we see in RStudio, except things are considerably simpler, right? Like the lower right corner here had like plots, help, the finder, and some other things. And a lot of that other stuff is now moved up into other locations that I think is really nice. I'm noticing, even though I'm not using version control, that things tie in with version control very nicely. So it may be picking up some of my packages that I use with VS Code, but like there's a remote explorer so that I could connect to GL, which is Great Lakes, which is the high performance computer that I use here at the University of Michigan. And so that's nice to think that I could use Positron with Great Lakes with my high performance computer. Of course, I can change the size of that stuff, right? There's different extensions that you can add to make the work in this environment a lot easier, right? So like if you're going to be doing things with Jupyter or with Python, those are all available. There's a lot of stuff with Git and GitHub to make that a lot easier to use. I've always felt like the Git integration with RStudio is a bit clunky and just not a lot of fun. If you've seen my previous episodes when we were using some of those pre-commit hooks, the output and all that stuff in RStudio just looked bad, right? It just looked bad. Whereas I suspect using a lot of these tools make it a lot easier, right? A lot of these packages. One of the other things that's really nice about having packages that you can use in VS Code or in Positron here is that anyone can develop those packages, right? I often get the feeling that if you want to contribute something to RStudio, well, you have to work for Posit, right? Or you have to submit a pull request to Posit to get something integrated in RStudio. Whereas again, I could create a package that could then be used with Positron, very much like I can make a package that I can then use with R, right? Kind of like, look, there's a code spell. And so I could install this spell checker for spell checking my code. So let's go ahead and install that, right? And so that works pretty quickly to get that installed. And we can kind of bring up this tab. There's a terminal, kind of like we've seen with RStudio problems, which I'm sure we'll see at some point. Ports, debug, spell checker, right? So the spell checking issues and the console. And if we kind of look over at like the help, let's see, how would we search? So I'm clicking on the magnifying glass to search, and I'm not sure how I ask for help, except I know I can do help down here. So like if I do help install.packages, and again, one of the nice things I see is that I'm typing this, it knows the functions that I might be looking for, right? And so we get these pop-ups, which is really nice, right? So go ahead and run that, and then that pops up this really attractive, in my mind, help window over here on the right side. And that's really nice. And maybe this magnifying glass is for looking for things within install packages, right? And so then you can scroll down, and let's see what all is in here. Again, it's really nicely formatted, whereas things aren't always really well formatted over in RStudio. So let's look at like the viewer. I think this would be for perhaps things like if we were rendering an R Markdown or Quarto document. Connections, I'm not totally sure. Maybe that must be for connecting to databases. Yeah, so, what did I just do? I just closed that. I wonder if I can get that back. Oh, restore panel. Now I may have made a mistake. What did I do? Restore panel. Let's see. That makes it smaller. Is there a way to get the stuff from the right back? Well, I didn't get that. And so maybe one of these things up here. This then gets me back my session help viewers connections. And I wonder what if I kind of click on this other icon, toggle panel. No, that's not what I want. If I click on this and I click that toggle, nope, that's not what I want. Let's do this. Nope, that's not what I want either. And now I'm forgetting what I had in this window. I'm sure someone out there is telling me, but I am not remembering what it was. I feel like it was probably viewing the plot, but like I said, I don't remember. It's a bit embarrassing. So the question then is like, how do you get it back if you don't remember it? Let's go to like the settings, and there's like profiles, settings, extensions, keyboard shortcuts, configure snippets, task theme. Let's look at the settings. And so then this is going to open up the settings, which again is very much like what you would see in VS Code. Again, it's got like the same underground platform. And so There's like a user as well as a workspace level of settings. So user would be like what I want for kind of everything I do, whereas workspace would be more for a particular project. And so kind of look through some of these. So like text editor, we can see that we can change various things having to do with the appearance of our code, all sorts of stuff. So that's a text editor, the workbench, appearance. And so maybe this is what they're calling this window that I'm looking at, the workbench, right? And so there's a color theme, Positron light. If we went to dark, ooh, no, it's dark. I like the light, as I've kind of said. I also like using default because most people, I think, are using the defaults. Anyway, so again, this is a lot of the theming and kind of appearance of the themes. And so that's cool. I think there's a lot of good options here that are set on by default that I think are pretty good. And there's clearly a lot of stuff here. And ultimately, the best way to explore things is to use it. So let's go ahead and use it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to make an R file. And there we go. I'm going to go ahead and save this to my desktop as gapminder_2007.r. Oh, it's reminding me I already have it, so I don't want to create a new one. So I'll say cancel, cancel. So let's open a file, and it's going to look in my desktop because that's the home directory at this point. I'll double click on that, and we'll open up what I have for a start of my gapminder2007.r script. And so let's go ahead and typically I do command return or command enter to run each line. Maybe I'll drag this up. Okay, there we go. And so now we see those things. And if we look at problems, we see that the spelling is spell checking my code. And so those 4 problems are misspellings, right? And so that is a bit aggressive, I think, right? Like these are, I don't like the spell checking. And so how would I turn that off? Well, I could come back to my code spell and I could do disable, and that should turn that off. So I'll go ahead and click on that code spell and I will do disable. And the circle with the arrow is refresh, so I can hit refresh there. And so then I can see that this code spell checker is no longer enabled. And then if I come back here, for whatever reason, it is still spell checking my code. Whatever. I'm not going to let this slow me down. And again, this is the plot that I want to make. And so we'll do, so we already have library gapminder. If I do gapminder, I forgot the N. So I also like the look of the console where it's giving me an error with where it's got like the red margin to the left and the error in green. It really pops out to me. So, all right, gapminder. Now we get the data frame gapminder. What we've got are the country, the continent, the year, the life expectancy, the population, and the GDP per capita. We want the data for 2007, as well as the life expectancy and the GDP per capita. The size of the circle is also related to the population, and the color is the continent. So I'll go ahead and do filter year equals 2007. And so now we have our country, continent, year, life expectancy, population, and GDP per capita for the 142 countries in the data set. And so we can then pipe this to ggplot AES. And on the x-axis, we're going to want the GDP per cap. So we'll do GDP per cap. And then y is going to be life exp, right? And then the size is going to be the population, right? And then the color will make continent. And then we'll do geom_point. And so, yes, we got our bottom right corner back, and we now see that we have the plots. That looks good. Why don't I go ahead and run this? And this is going to create a PNG file. And so I'm curious if I look over here, if I can find gapminder PNG, and what do you know? It now shows up as being in my window, right? And so it's rendering the PNG file within what I'm doing here within Positron. So that's really cool. That's something that I really like about VS Code, and that has been a bit of a hindrance I find when using RStudio. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm wondering if the font is a little bit too small. So why don't I go ahead and increase the font size a little bit and let me move this over. Good. So hopefully this font size is big enough for people to see. So again, looking at the plot, we know that there's no legend. And so we're going to want to turn off the legend. And so the other thing that I notice is that in this version of the plot, there is a white line outlining each of the circles, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so we could do that with the plot symbol, the shape 21, right? And so we'll come back over here and we'll do to shape equals 21. So it's complaining down here in the bottom corner, and it's complaining because I've really zoomed in so that you all can see what I'm typing, and it's set to auto. And so it's not really happy about that. So maybe if I put fit down to like 50. Yeah, I think I've just zoomed in so far that it's not really happy. So I'm not going to worry about the plots down here, and I'll encourage you to ignore it as well. But what we're looking at is here. And of course, I used color as my aesthetic, whereas I want the fill to be the aesthetic, and I want the border to then be white. So we'll do fill equals continent. And here then we'll do color equals white. And so now we can see that we do have those white borders around each of the symbols over here where my plots are. I'm not really a big fan on having the plots there, especially when I keep getting this error message pop up. I would kind of like to have the console over here on the right side. But let's roll with this for now, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. All right. So again, this is the plot that we have that I'm trying to emulate. And one thing that I notice is that our colors are a bit different. So let's go ahead and take Gapminder and do a count on continents. And so we see Africa, Americas, Asia, Europe, Oceania. And so we can go ahead and do scale, fill manual, breaks equals Africa, Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, right? And then our values, and so that was weird that it moved everything to the far side and not within the function, right, in terms of the automatic indentation. So that was a little bit odd. Anyway, not a big deal. And so I believe Africa is this green color. And I'm noticing that I don't get this to pop up as being green. There's probably a setting somewhere to fix that. USA is red, so that's part of the Americas. We'll do red. Asia, I believe, is blue because that's where China and India are. So we'll do blue. Europe, I think, is going to be that orange color. And then Oceania, I think, is purple, right? I see two purple circles up here. So we'll do purple. And then let's see what this looks like. So the colors are pretty close. That green is not quite right. Let's go ahead and make that dark green. So it's not the exact green that they had, but it's pretty close. Let's go ahead and get rid of those legends off to the right. And we can do that here in geopoint. We can do show.legend equals false. And so now we have the full real estate. Let's go ahead and work on our labels. So we'll do labs. On the X, they have GDP per capita in USD. So let's go ahead and put that in quotes. And then Y is life expectancy in years. Can I copy that? Not very easily, but we'll try. All right, life expectancy in years. All right. And then the title is Global Development in 2007. All right, and get that in quotes. All right, let's see if we can get our indenting to be right. No, we can't. Why? I wonder if I highlight that and I do selection, if there's something for reflowing. I believe I actually just committed this to memory. In RStudio, I could do like Command I. It doesn't like that. All right. So some of this is perhaps learning some of the keystrokes and some of the idiosyncrasies of the auto intent. And so now we get those titles. It has left justified the title, the global development in 2007. So I'm going to go ahead and add theme. The theme that is in this plot is the default gray. And so we'll do plot.title equals element text. And we can get that centered by doing hjust equals 0.5. And I'm going to go ahead and put this on a separate line. And so now we've got global development 2007 centered, looking good. Now let's go ahead and change our x-axis to be log scaled. And so it goes 1K, 10K, and probably 100K. And so we can do that. Back up here, I'll put this after my scale fill manual. I'll do scale x log 10. So we see the 1,000, the 10,000, and we're missing the 100,000 that we had here. So let's go ahead and add those as limits. And we can do that back up here in scale x log 10. We'll do breaks equals C1e to the 3, 1e to the 4, 1e to the 5. And we'll want to do limits equals, let's try 1 to 1e to the 5. All right, so it's not 1. And we've also got the expand on, whereas in this one, the expand is not on. So let's go ahead and turn off the expand. And maybe let's try 300 instead of 1. So actually, I should have done 100, but let's try 300 and go from there. And then we'll also do expand equals C 0, 0. And so it's complaining that one row contained missing values. So maybe we should put this down to 100. So let's try 200, and that will probably be good enough. So I think that's pretty good. Now we need to fix the labels on our x-axis. We can do labels, and we'll do 1K, 10K, and 100K. And so our 100 gets clipped. That annoys me. I know I had it in the original, but let's go ahead and add chord Cartesian, and let's turn off that clip. So we'll say clip equals off. And what that should do is to show us the text that falls outside of the plotting window. But we're not seeing that here, right? It's still hiding that K. And I wonder if that's part of the margin. So let's do plot.margin equals margin. And then on the right, let's do 20. And so there's our K. I'm not quite sure how much further to the right it's going. Suppose I could probably drop that, and let's try 10 and see if, so that K is still there. What happens if we go down to 5? That goes away. So let's put it back to 10 and call it good. The other thing I'm noticing is that we have the minor grid lines on the X and Y axis, whereas they don't. So we can go ahead and turn that off back up here in theme, and we'll do panel.grid.minor. And I can, I think, do both of them by doing element blank. And there we go. We've gotten rid of those minor grid lines, and I think that looks pretty good. One other thing I want to check is that we go from 40 to 80 in the original, and we have 40 to 80 here. That looks good. Also, I noticed that they don't have any tick marks. So let's go ahead and remove the tick marks. And again, we can do that back up here. We can do axis.ticks equals element blank. And so we now see that those tick marks are gone. Very good. The last thing I think we have to do is to go ahead and add the text for India, China, and USA. So let's go ahead and come back up here. And so we have basically one pipeline to make this whole plot, right? So why don't we go ahead and call this GM 2007, and we can then break it here, and we'll then feed GM 2007 into ggplot. So let's go ahead and rerun everything just to make sure everything still works. It does. That's good. I'm noticing that I can kind of zoom in and out by clicking Option and then clicking, right? So if I zoom out, and then if I put my magnifying glass with the plus, I can zoom in. This is going to take a little bit to get used to. So let's then come back up here, and we had GM 2007 that has all of the countries for 2007, right? And so we'll go ahead and do GM 2007 labels. So we'll take GM 2007 and pipe that to filter, and we'll say country in, and then we can say we want to return the countries that are these three countries, right? Which were USA, right? It was USA, India, and China. And so let's look at GM 2007 labels. And we lost USA. So what is USA? What is the United States? Maybe it's the United States, right? And let's check. So GM 2007. Actually, we're going to try something. Let's look at GM 2007. So we can click on that. Whoa, that's wild. We see summary statistics for my different columns, right? And we can see that country with A for text, year with a pound sign for a number. Cool. So let's scroll down and see if we can find the United States. It's probably in with the U's, right? United States, not USA. So this was cool to be able to see what this looks like, right? And kind of play with this. I'm not someone that used the view function a lot in RStudio. And so I kind of have to teach myself a little bit of how to play with this. And it looks like you can kind of, you can put the summary on the left or the right. That's pretty slick, right? You can do some type of filtering, stuff with, narrowing things down to columns and whatnot. Cool. All right. So let's come back and we want United States. And so now if we look at our GM labels, let's practice this. We now see that we've got those three countries. Very good. All right. And so, but I want to change United States to be USA because they had USA here. And so let's go ahead and do a mutate on country and do, the country is going to be if else, if country is United States, then I want it to be USA. Otherwise, I want it to be the country. And so now it's unhappy. Condition must be a logical vector. Oh, so I want to say if country equals United States. And so now we can come back to our labels and see that we do have USA there and we're in good shape. All right. So now let's go ahead and take our labels and we'll add another geom. So we'll do geom text. And all the aesthetics are going to be the same, but we need to add the label. So we'll do AES label equals country. Oh, so we have the names of all the countries and they're also being sized, which is not what I want. And we also, of course, have the legend. All right, so I forgot to do something. That's okay. And so I forgot to say data equals GM 2007 labels, and then mapping equals all that. And so now we have India, China, USA, but of course, they're right on the dots and they are being sized by the population, which is not what I want. So we'll come back up here then, and let's do size equals, let's do 8, and then size.unit equals PT. All right, so that's a decent size. So the USA size font is a little bit bigger than the circle, whereas here it's just about the same size. So I used, I think I used 10 or 8. Let's up that to 10, and it could probably be a little bit bigger still. So let's up it to 12. Now we need to move the labels off of the points. And so we're going to want to move that a bit. So we'll come back to our mutate. And again, it's got that kind of funny indentation, which I'm not loving, but maybe it'll help me to have better practices. So on the x-axis, there was GDP per cap. And then on the y was life expect, XP, right? And then if we look at our labels, that was this, right? So it goes China, India, USA. And so I'm going to manually put in those values. So again, it goes China, India, USA. And if we look at this and kind of zoom out a bit, so India and China are close to what they should be. They should be to the left a bit. And the USA should be to the right. So let's worry about X first. And so that is the GDP per cap. So I'll comment out the life exp. And so then the labels, so China GDP per cap was 4959. Let's maybe move it to 4700 and 2200. So we'll do 4700, 2200, and then USA needs to move to the right a bit. So this is going to be 43,000. Let's maybe move it up to 45,000. So the India is in a good position. The China still needs to move over, as does the USA. Again, it goes China, India, USA. And so China needs to come over. Let's go to 4,000. And then let's put this maybe up to 50,000 for the US. So India and China now, I think, are in pretty good places. The USA still needs to go over to the right a fair amount. And so let's put this up to, say, 70,000. So I think the USA is in a good place now. And then the China and India need to move up, right? And so those are on a linear scale. So India could probably, it's probably right at about like 64. It could probably move up to like 68. And China could probably move up to 78. And so let's do that, where we will go to life expectancy and get rid of these comments. And so again, the China, I said 78, India at 68, and the US was at what? 78. I'll do 78. So that looks pretty good. The India can maybe go up a little bit and the China down a little bit. You know me, I love to tinker with these things. So again, the China we want to bring down to, say, 77, and the India go up to, say, 69. So zooming in on that, I think we've done a pretty good job of recreating the original figure that I was working off of. The greens are a little bit different, but who cares? But otherwise, I think we did a really nice job of replicating the original figure. Yeah, and I think this allows us to play a bit with Positron here. And again, the R code is all the same, but it's the environment that's a bit different. There are things that I'm wondering if it's just beta and it's just beta, right? And so it's gonna be buggy. Things like this in the lower right corner, it's gonna drive me nuts. I would need to find a way to turn this off. So if anyone knows how to turn this off, let me know, because I think I wanna use this, but this is just annoying. The other thing that I'm thinking about is this console. I think I'd like to have on the right side. I don't think about these things often, but I think that in VS Code, as I use it, I think I have my console over here on the right. Let me see if I can set that up here real quick. So let me go ahead and close this secondary bar, and let me click on this console, right? And I can do panel position is at the bottom. So I can set it to the right. And that puts my console on the right, which is good, right? But I see my code on is kind of running into that, right? And so I actually really like having my code on the right and having my text on the left. And then I could have my plot like that, right? And so that then gives me more room to look at my plot. So let me close some of these tabs. That's good. And so I'd want to clean this up a little bit. So let's get these arguments on separate lines. All right. So then if I run this, whoa. I don't like that. It re-popped up this sessions tab. And so I wonder if I can close that. And is it going to do it again? Yeah, it's going to keep doing that. And so I need to find a way to keep it from opening up all this stuff. Click on this icon here. I see there's a variety of different layouts and ways to do the layout and to customize the layout. This stacked layout is the default, right? And so let's come back and let's do side-by-side layout. That's good. I think. Except, did I lose my bar on the left with all my other stuff? And what is going on down here? So this shows me the problems at the bottom, kind of the spell checking issue that should be gone, but isn't gone. But then it puts my console here on the right. So if I were to run this, that's going to open up the plots. And I don't know that I want the plots because I've got it right here, right? But maybe that is handy. It'd be nice if there was a way to turn this off. If I close that, that goes away. I don't know. And then variables is down here at the bottom, which is nice. And there's probably a way to move this panel to perhaps be at the top or whatever, right? But that's cool. All right. So the console is there, and I feel like I'm just kind of muttering to myself here at some point. And I can clear the console. All right. So this is cool. Again, this is going to take some practice to get used to and to get to a place where I like it. But again, that's part of the fun of learning a new tool. And of course, there are going to be problems along the way with it being beta, with it being new, and just trying to figure things out. One thing I would like to have back on the left side here is my Finder window, because a lot of the projects I do have many files. And so being able to kind of navigate that would be really nice. And so, is that the open view? No. Let's see if I can find it here real quick. Explorer. There's the Explorer. And what was the Explorer? There's some, but I lost all the others. Oh, all that stuff's down here. Wow, there's all sorts of stuff to play with, and I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole, and I'm going to end it here because I think we achieved the goal of playing around with this new tool, Positron, kicking the tires, seeing how it works, seeing what I like, what I don't like, what I'd have to learn, what I'd have to still customize. And everybody's going to be different. Everyone has their own idiosyncrasies of what they like and what they don't like. So far, I like this. I'm not sure that I like it better than VS Code, but I think I'm going to put that on me and say, Pat, you need to learn a little bit more about Positron before you can render a final judgment on whether you like Positron or Visual Studio Code better. Anyway, let me know what you think. Let me know what you have played with Positron. Have you played with VS Code? What do you think of RStudio and how they compare to these other IDEs? Are there other IDEs that you've worked with? And perhaps we can learn how to use this a bit together as we go forward. I will also have to adjust, if I use this tool, I'll have to adjust how I make my videos, because I have kind of a formula for how I work with RStudio at this point that I think kind of works. Not everyone loves it, I know, but it works for me. And so we'll have to play with things a little bit. So let me know what you think down below in the comments, and let me know if you've played with Positron and what you think about it. All right, well, that's enough for today. Please tell your friends about what we've been doing here and what we've been learning about Positron, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Code Club.